let us concentrate just a moment. Always ask for Sri Aurobindo's help to aid us in at least a beginning understanding of these lines. We cannot expect to know everything perfectly because we have not arrived there as yet. So we do our best to share. Earth, by this golden superfluity, bore thinking man, and more than man shall bear. This higher scheme of being is our cause, and holds the key to our ascending fate. It calls out of our dense mortality the conscious spirit nursed in matter's house. This is a complex sentence. Superfluity, of course, means an overabundance, but it's in a very positive sense. We can even say an excess in the most positive sense. So earth, and this is the key here, earth, by this golden superfluity, bore thinking man. And then he tells us more than man shall bear. So already he's giving us an intimation, a hint that the evolution is going to go beyond man. As they have often said, man is only a transitional being. So he has a semicolon after the word bear because he wants to tell us more about this. What is going to happen through this golden superfluity. Isn't that an extraordinary line? A golden superfluity. Gold here is so very important. It is always an indication of the supermental. This higher scheme of being is our cause and holds the key to our ascending fate. So this higher scheme of being, this golden superfluity of earth that has already borne thinking man and is going to bear more than man. And therefore this higher scheme of being is our cause, because what other cause would there be? All other religions tell us that we have only one chance to go to a nirvana, to go to a heaven, to go to where the Muslims speak. One time. But this higher scheme of being is our cause, and it holds the key to our ascending fate. It calls out of our dense mortality the conscious spirit nursed in matter's house. Very, very interesting, because our mortality is dense. When we come into this earth, we don't know anything. We maybe feel the mother, the human mother, and we can hold on to her. But our mortality is progressive, except that when we're born, we begin to die. So out of our dense mortality, the conscious spirit, that is the psychic being or the soul, is nursed in matter's house. Well, we are in matter. There's no question about it. But what Sri Aurobindo tells us is something very interesting about matter, and I think we've covered it before, but I'd like to read one or two things. He says, matter is by no means fundamentally real. It is a structure of energy. Matter is the form of substance of being which the existence of Sat Chidananda assumes when it subjects itself to this phenomenal action of its own consciousness and force. The matter is the body or field of a consciousness hidden within it, and there it is, the conscious spirit nursed in matter's house. The material universe is only a form and movement of the spirit. He goes on to tell us, because there is a full stop after matter's house. And then he begins to tell us about these planes that Ashwapati is experiencing. He's seeing them now. We're only in Canto 1 of Book 2. And there is so far to go because there are 15 cantos in this book. The living symbol of these conscious planes, its influences and godheads of the unseen, its unthought logic of reality's acts, arisen from the unspoken truth in things, have fixed our inner life's slow-scaled degrees. Oh, it's so beautiful because Sri Aurobindo knows everything about us. And he says, it's our inner life that has slow-scaled degrees. Yes, we can't ascend immediately into the supermind. There's so much that we have to go through in life, so much of life experience, actually, until we find that our only sustenance is in the divine. And so we see the living symbol of these conscious planes. We see the influences and the godheads of the unseen, and its unthought logic of reality's acts. Now, Sri Aurobindo tells us there is a reality, a truth of all existence, which is greater and more abiding than all its formations and manifestations. Isn't that extraordinary? This is from the Life Divine. This reality is there within each thing and gives to each of its formations its power of being and value of being. An omnipresent reality is the truth of all life and existence, whether absolute or relative, whether corporeal or incorporeal, whether animate or inanimate, whether intelligent or unintelligent, and in all its infinitely varying and even constantly opposed self-expressions, from the contradictions nearest to our ordinary experience to those remotest antinomies which lose themselves on the verges of the ineffable. The reality is one and not a sum or concourse. From that, all variations begin. In that, all variations consist. To that, all variations return. All affirmations are denied only to lead to a wider affirmation of the same reality. You know, I had a letter once from a gentleman from Greece, and he writes a very interesting letter. I believe I should share it with you today because we see Sri Aurobindo writing so many words and using all the words in English that are appropriate to a vision he is conveying to us, especially this omnipresent reality. So let me read that. It'll take a couple of minutes, but I think it's very, very important. This fellow writes, his name is Nikos Hadjikostis. I was thinking why I had found Old Goriot by Balzac, considered one of the greatest novels of the 19th century, quite mediocre, uninspiring, and to a degree, even shallow, and why I cannot easily read novels anymore. I never read novels too much anyway, but now it has become almost impossible for me. Actually, now I think about it, I can't read and enjoy that many writers anymore after I have been permeated, or should I say, invaded and conquered by Aurobindo's prose. I recall at the end of 2003 when I started reading my first philosophical book after having read Aurobindo. It was The Philosophy of Consciousness Without an Object of M. Wolfe. How poor and devoid of beauty and depth I felt his language was in comparison to Aurobindo's. Wolfe's language is actually great, and his book was praised, not for its content, but also for its excellent prose. Now I actually like it and read Wolfe with great pleasure. However, coming as I was from my total immersion in the life divine, made me feel something similar to what I feel listening to some lesser composer after having listened to Bach. The latter is so multidimensional, has so much substance and depth, that a Mendelssohn or a Schubert seem to be empty and shallow when put next to him. Personally, I cannot totally agree with the Schubert line, but we'll carry on. Aurobindo's language in the life divine is not just the best English prose ever written. It is also the greatest prose ever written in any language, period. Aurobindo is Plato and Shankara, Michelangelo and Bernini, Bach and Beethoven, Shakespeare and Proust, all in one. He is at once infinite and intimate, otherworldly and tangible, ungraspable, yet the most clear and transparent, the pinnacle of rational thinking, yet loving like a father. His prose reaches the limits of language, yet it remains the clearest language of all. It exceeds itself to become poetry, yet it miraculously still remains prose. It is apparently convoluted and long-winded, yet it is the most condensed form possible that can express the inexpressible. It is seemingly words and sentences, but in reality, it is a divine song that lingers forever and ever in one's ear. It is contained in a book, but it surpasses all books and all other human creations since the beginning of time. And I read that because we have to read Sri Aurobindo like that. If we don't understand a passage or a sentence, we must go over it again and again, and without mental frustration or mental arrogance, allow it to sink into our consciousness, and eventually we will understand it. And so we have today the divine reality. So he says, arisen from the unspoken truth in things, have fixed our inner life's slow-scaled degrees. Its steps are paces of the soul's return from the deep adventure of material birth, a ladder of delivering ascent and rungs that nature climbs to deity. So again, here he tells us so clearly that our steps, our stumbles, even our falls are paces of the soul's return. And where is that soul returning from? From the deep adventure of material birth. It is truly a ladder of delivering ascent. To deliver someone to or something is to actually rescue or save or set free or liberate, emancipate. So it is a ladder of delivering ascent. And it is also rungs that nature uses to climb to deity. So very, very powerful. And we can understand it. Now, he's going to tell us here in these next 4 lines something extremely, extremely important to each of us. Once in the vigil of a deathless gaze, these grades had marked her giant downward plunge, the wide and prone leap of a Godhead's fall. There's a full stop there, but I have to continue with this next line. Our life is a holocaust of the Supreme. How can we begin to understand this? Once in the vigil, a vigil is a watch that's kept normally during sleeping hours. And this vigil, this watch of a deathless gaze, these grades had marked her giant downward plunge, the wide and prone leap of a Godhead's fall. This is the divine coming down to earth, bringing life to matter that is even more than asleep, inanimate. And as a result, he says, our life is a holocaust of the Supreme. A holocaust is a total and supreme sacrifice. That's its true definition. A total and supreme sacrifice. And then these magnificent lines. The great world mother, by her sacrifice, has made her soul the body of our state, accepting sorrow and unconsciousness. Divinity's lapse from its own splendors wove the many patterned ground of all we are. So we see that this holocaust of the Divine Mother as well. Our life is a holocaust of the Supreme, the Lord, and the Divine Mother. And then in this next line, he hyphenates World Mother. She is not only the mother of this world, she is the mother of all worlds. And he says to us in the mother, the mother not only governs all from above, but she descends into this lesser triple universe, mind, life, body. Impersonally, and that was my own quote, impersonally, all things here, even the movements of ignorance, are herself, in veiled power, and her creations in diminished substance. Her nature body and nature force, they exist, her nature body and nature force, and they exist because moved by the mysterious fiat of the Supreme to work out something that was there in the possibilities of the infinite, she has consented to the great sacrifice and has put on, like a mask, the soul and forms of the ignorance. But personally, too, she has stooped to descend here into the darkness, that she may lead it to the light, into the falsehood and error, that she may convert it to the truth, into this death, that she may turn it to godlike life, into this world pain and its obstinate sorrow and suffering, that she may end it in the transforming ecstasy of her sublime Ananda. In her deep and great love for her children, she has consented to put on herself the cloak of this obscurity, condescended to bear the attacks and torturing influences of the powers of darkness and the falsehood, born to pass through the portals of the birth that is a death. Taken upon herself the pangs and sorrows and sufferings of the creation, since it seemed that thus alone could it be lifted to the light and joy and truth and eternal life. This is the great sacrifice, called sometimes the sacrifice of the Purusha, but much more deeply, the Holocaust of Prakriti, the sacrifice of the Divine Mother. So you see, when we read things like this, we see that these lines, our life is a holocaust of the Supreme, or the great World Mother by her sacrifice, take on much, much deeper meaning, because Sri Aurobindo has written just about everything we could understand, not mentally, but spiritually. Vladimir, can you add something from the Vedas?
I had some thoughts, but you read this beautiful passage and they kind of faded away. And this Holocaust, and the beautiful here is the earth by this golden superfluity. You see, driven by an inanimate world force. There is inanimate, there is no life in it. And then earth comes, and it has this golden superfluity which can actually incorporate, hold the living being and give it body. And that's something what Mother constantly speaks about Earth, that Earth is the psychic being in the universe, that only here the evolution of consciousness can take place in the physical form. And that is the unique kind of quality of Earth. That's what came to me first.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll go on a little bit more because I don't want to just end right there. So let me go back to the great World Mother, by her sacrifice, has made her soul the body of our state. Accepting sorrow and unconsciousness, divinity's lapse from its own splendors wove the many-patterned ground of all we are. An idol of self is our mortality. And for those of you who are new to some of my talks on Nolini, I want to share just briefly what he said to us one day. It was on my birthday in 1979, when he tells us that she has put a part of herself into each of us. Truly. We think we are individuals. And of course, there is the ego that has brought us to the consciousness of our individuality. And that is not a bad thing. Sri Aurobindo says ego was the helper. And now it has, of course, become the bar. But he says we think we are different beings. We are not. We are all the mother who has put herself into each of us. Our earth is a fragment and a residue. Interesting that the earth is just a fragment and a residue to the Divine Mother, of course. A residue is something that remains after the removal of some parts or a part. Her power is packed with the stuff of greater worlds. Wow. And I will go on just to the next page for a few minutes. That's page 100. We have the word, and steeped in their color lusters, dimmed by her drowse, an atavism of higher births is hers. Now he's telling us about the Divine Mother. And he calls it a drowse that these color lusters of her are dimmed by. Now, steeped means immersed or thoroughly in a specific state. So they're steeped in these color lusters, dimmed by her drowse, semicolon, an atavism of higher births is hers. That's an interesting line, because an atavism usually means a reversion to an earlier type. So we cannot say that Mother is only here on earth. She is the Supreme Shakti who has had much higher births in many, many worlds. And people have seen her in those worlds. But earth, we have to always remember, is the place of the evolution towards the supermind. Her sleep is stirred by their buried memories, recalling the lost spheres from which they fell. Unsatisfied forces in her bosom move. They are partners of her greater growing fate and her return to immortality. See, so the sleep of the Divine Mother. I'm sure there's something in the Vedas here for you to give us, Vladimir, is stirred by buried memories, recalling the lost spheres from which they fell. Well, she had to take a Holocaust, a plunge, a Holocaust into the earth, which was not the easiest thing. Unsatisfied forces are therefore moving in her bosom, but they are partners of her greater growing fate and her return to immortality. They consent to share her doom of birth and death. They kindle partial gleams of the all and drive her blind, laborious spirit to compose a meager image of the mighty whole. Oh, Sri Aurobindo is giving us here such a vision of the Divine Mother. These forces that are moving in her bosom are actually partners of her greater growing fate. That greater growing fate is going to be found in this return to immortality, which is promised to all who have taken up this yoga. It is actually promised to humanity as a whole, but there will be very few at first. Why? Well, they consent to share her doom of birth and death, and they kindle partial gleams of the all and drive her blind, laborious spirit to compose. Now, no one has truly seen the Divine Mother as she is. We have seen her in her physical form. Some of us have seen her on higher planes, but we cannot capture that vision in words. And I remember, I think I might have told you once before, but briefly, Huta asked her, "Mother, are you truly the divine?" And Mother said, "Come tomorrow." And I was sitting with Huta in her house, and she says to me, "I came that morning," and she could hardly speak. She was so shaken. She said, "Mother showed me from her waist up her true self. I couldn't bear it." So what is her blindless, laborious spirit? To compose a meager image of the mighty whole, that of these partial gleams of the all. We will find out more next week. I really thank you all for bearing with me today. This was the challenging portion, but such a beautiful one. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them. And I thank you all for who have sent me photos. I'm very grateful. I've put them into the archive volumes already. So those who have not, please consider doing it. Narada12@gmail.com. Any questions? Namaste. Namaste. May Mother always be with you and in you, around you,